A bloody scene at a North Carolina hospital. And not in the way you'd think. A hospital patient is accused of taking his blood and spraying it on hospital workers, exposing them to a disease. We're breaking down the disturbing allegations. This is Inside the Crime, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. You know, sometimes working here at Law&Crime, you feel like you've seen it all. But police say this wasn't an accident. It was intentional, which makes you wonder, why wasn't he arrested immediately? Instead, he wasn't arrested until 6 months after the bloody incident. So how did we get here? We don't know much about the lead up to this incident, but this is what police say happened. On March 21st, Kameron Gilchrest was being treated at a hospital in Raleigh. We don't know the full extent of his treatment. The arrest warrant only saying he was there for diabetic reasons. We're going to keep the names of the victims out of this story, but this is what I will say. According to police, there were two victims, a man and a woman. For this story, we'll call them Jane and John Doe. So Jane and John were working at the UNC Health Rex. Both were treating Kameron for his reported diabetic reasons. According to police, he had an IV attached to his arm. Then he reportedly removed the IV, which according to the arrest warrant, Kameron then allegedly aimed his HIV-positive blood at the victim's eyes, which injured his eyes. Now, the exact same phrasing was under the allegations for Jane too. On or about on the date of offense shown and in the county named above, the defendant unlawfully and willfully did assault and strike Jane, a female person, by removing his IV from his arm, which he aimed his HIV-positive blood at the victim's eyes, which entered her eyes. It's unclear whether Jane or John contracted HIV, but according to the arrest warrant, both victims were exposed to HIV and had irritations to their eyes. As I mentioned earlier, this incident happened back in March, but Kameron wasn't arrested until September 11th. He was charged with 2 counts of assaulting emergency personnel. That charge is reportedly a felony that could carry a sentence of 39 months in prison for each count. He's also facing charges of simple assault and assault on a female. It's unclear why his arrest came so long after the incident, but according to a report by WRAL, Raleigh police told the outlet Kameron was receiving medical and psychiatric treatment at the time of the incident, so he couldn't be arrested then. I did reach out to UNC Health Rex, and this is what a spokesperson told me in a statement. UNC Health Rex can't comment on a specific patient or incident involving our employees due to privacy laws. One of our top priorities is protecting the health and safety of our employees, and Rex continually strive to ensure we provide a safe working environment. Unfortunately, violent situations and threats of violence against health workers have become more common across the country. Our hospital leaders work closely with our security team and law enforcement to protect our workers and pursue legal action when necessary. So pursue legal action when necessary. Well, what could that look like? Well, I'm joined now by trial attorney and federal litigator Alexis Rosenberg. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today. Do you see a possibility of the hospital pursuing civil legal action against the 25-year-old?
Well, I don't necessarily see that they're going to necessarily pursue action, especially with knowing that it took a while to even have charges filed against them because it appears that we have some mental health issues going on. So that's going to play into whether he's even going to be competent enough to be able to stand trial or when he would be competent enough to stand trial. However, I do see that the employees of the hospital do have a very strong workers' compensation claim against the hospital.
And what could that mean, and what does that possibly look like?
Well, so at this time, we don't know if they actually have contracted HIV. But with a workers' comp claim, if the incident happened while or during their employment, then they can file for workers' compensation. If they ultimately, and let's hope this isn't the case, contract HIV, then depending on the state, each workers' compensation, what they're entitled to, depends on the state. But we're talking about their care, lost wages, if they need accommodations, those sort of things usually are included in that workers' compensation claim.
You know, there's a reason that Law&Crime is the go-to spot for all legal and true crime content on YouTube. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan is America's largest personal injury law firm. They're a firm with more than 1,000 attorneys, and that's because they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Even if you think your case isn't worth millions, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy you can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/insidethecrime by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on your screen. And let's talk about what the victims in this case kind of went through. And I understand how delicate the situation is. We aren't saying the victims' real names. We don't know if they've contracted HIV, but what's your take on what we do know so far? And it's a very kind of gross story in a sense that we don't see something like this happen every so often. But the fact that you rip an IV out allegedly and blood goes into these hospital workers' eyes. It caused them irritation. Again, we don't know if they've contracted HIV, but I can only imagine how scary that situation was. And then for the suspect not to be arrested until months later, I can't even imagine what the victims are going through.
Well, it's terrifying. And like you said, it's just gross. Now, of course, the employees are used to working around bodily fluids and those
Right.
sort of things and taking certain sort of precautions. So as we sit here, not in the medical field, it's just having blood thrown on us. It just
Yeah.
is, like you said, disgusting. They're used to being around bodily fluids. That being said, just the terror, stress of not knowing whether you have contracted HIV or contracted some other illness, because we are talking about blood here. So that in itself is terrifying. The stress of having to wait to determine, if you have gotten anything is like I said, extremely stressful. There's really no other word for that
Yeah.
until they find out exactly what the long-term implications are.
And what changes is in terms of the trajectory of the case if the victims do contract HIV?
So, I mean, this is an interesting from a criminal standpoint because we're talking he ripped the IV out. So it's not like he turned around and punched, for instance, one of the nurses. I mean that. So he ripped it out. What was the intent? Where were there? There's a lot of factors on the criminal end that we're talking about. If they do contract it, and then they could obviously upgrade it because in North Carolina there it is a felony to assault, which is what he's been charged with, a medical professional, and then it can be upgraded for the penalty or the prison sentence depending on if it has caused serious bodily harm, and HIV would definitely fall under causing serious bodily harm.
And normally, when we see cases like this of intentional exposure of HIV, it's through sexual contact. It's people having sex with other people, not telling them or disclosing their HIV status to them. But this is a little different. The arrest warrant claims that going back to him ripping out the IV and intentionally spraying the blood, because that's the phrasing that they had used in those court documents. But overall, how serious is this case in terms of criminal charges? Because it is a felony charge of assault, but in this manner, what are your thoughts on just the seriousness of this?
Also, it's serious because we have, potentially people who are just trying to care for patients that may now have HIV. But I do think, and we don't have all the facts related to
Right.
this case. If it's a situation where you had, let's say, a patient and they no longer wanted to be there and they rip out the IV and blood spurts everywhere, I think the prosecutor is going to have a hard time with that, intentionally trying to spray blood on the healthcare providers. Whereas if you have a situation where they were there and there was some sort of statement or something to the nature that I want to spray blood on you, there's a difference between ripping an IV out and actually throwing blood on someone.
Yeah.
So I do think there's potentially issues there, but I think more so we have this mental health a part of it as well. So will he ultimately be convicted or plead to those specific charges, we don't know that. It could be pled out, or it could be simply a situation where, it's determined that he needs mental health, or he's not even capable of standing trial.
Mhm. And who do you think has the biggest hurdle in a case like this, the defense or the prosecution? Because I can see an argument for both, especially for the prosecutors who have to kind of prove beyond a reasonable doubt if we do get to that point in a trial or the case of that, he did intentionally. Because I'm thinking just the whole movement of intentionally ripping out an IV that's attached to your arm, and then I guess that this is how it seems like it's playing out in the arrest warrant, just
Right.
spraying the blood. But do you think that a jury could see it the same way, that maybe it was a moment of emotional distress? He was going through some type of mental health episode, ripped out the IV in response to that, and then the blood got on the hospital workers. I could see it playing out for both sides, the prosecution and the defense. But what's your take?
Definitely, Elizabeth. I think we don't have the specifics of actually what happened
Mm-hmm.
exactly, because I can see what you're saying, but I also can see a situation where he's like, I want to be out of here. And in
Mm-hmm.
a hospital, unless you're on some sort of mental hold, that there's a court order, you're allowed to leave a hospital. You're allowed to deny and say, I don't want that treatment, or I don't agree with that. You have a right to say, I don't want an IV in my arm anymore. You have a right to say that. So, I mean, we don't know the exact situation. From what's coming out, it appears that he had intentionally ripped it out to get blood on them, but I don't know necessarily if they have enough evidence to support that, or if it's a situation where he was like, I want the IV out of my arm. And if you're not going to take it out right now, I'm going to take it out. He's not a medical professional. So he could have taken that IV out because he has a right not to say, I don't want an IV anymore, and have that unintentionally spray blood in the room.
And there's so much stigma surrounding HIV, but I'm curious, Alexis, whether or not you think that Cameron would still be facing this assault charge if he wasn't allegedly HIV positive.
It depends. Once again, I think it really depends on the details, and we don't have those specific details,
Mhm.
whether he would be facing assault. Now, you can't go in, even if you've decided you don't want treatment, and like I said, shove a medical professional. That still is assault. So the
Mhm.
law doesn't change because you're in a hospital. It doesn't lessen, it's not heightened. You can't act inappropriately or do something that's illegal, and if an outside setting or in the hospital, it's the same thing. So it's in those details. Did he rip that IV out to spray blood on them knowing he had HIV? That's one scenario. Or the other scenario was, I want the IV out, and they're saying, we're not taking the IV out right now, and then he takes it out and inadvertently they're sprayed. Really, this case is going to come down to those details and being able to prove those specific details. But we also have, the intent issue
Mhm.
as to, and somebody that, because it took so long and was ultimately on a psychiatric hold for the delay in the filing of those charges, did he have the intent? I mean, that's a question too. Was he even with it enough to be able to make a decision as to that's what he was doing, intentionally taking that out to spray blood on them and contaminate them with HIV.
Mhm. And why do you think that the charges and arrest didn't come until months later? From what we do know, it was because that Cameron was allegedly on this psychiatric hold in the hospital. But we've seen cases, I felt like before, of people who have been in a hospital setting who have been placed under arrest. Why do you think it wasn't the same in this case?
Well, when you have a hospital situation, there's a HIPAA that's involved with those. So sometimes there's a delay in charges, or it delays an investigation because of that. I think in this situation, based on what we now know, he was on that psychiatric hold. So now they have to make a determination: was this inadvertent? Was this criminal? How did this happen? And that's why I'm saying the attention is in those details, and we don't have the whole entire investigation file. So we don't know those. But at some point, the police made a determination, apparently, that this was an intentional thing that he did for that purpose.
Mhm. And do you see a grand jury indicting him on these charges?
Well, he has been charged. He's been
Hmm.
charged with the assault on a medical professional in North Carolina. That's, up to 2 years. However, if it's severe bodily injury, then that can go up with regard to the prison, the prison sentence. He was charged with 2 counts of it.
And say, I'm going to just throw it out there, Alexis, say he is your client. What route are you going with if he is your client?
I would go with that. It wasn't intentional, that he
Mhm.
wanted that IV out of his arm, that he possibly had expressed in some manner that he wanted the IV, and it was not his intent to spray them, and he didn't really do anything that was intentional, as well as that he, wasn't even capable because he was having a psychotic breakdown to be able to even make that determination to harm them intentionally.
Mhm. And his next court appearance is a few weeks away. What do you think will happen then?
Well, I think this is the first appearance that he has
Yeah.
made because he was on that psychiatric hold, or he was in a psychiatric facility. So the likelihood is he at this point he's probably going to plead not guilty, I would assume.
We'll see how this continues to play out, and hopefully we'll get more information down the line. But I also understand how delicate a case like this really is, especially when it involves the hospital system and the patient or the status of different patients, all of that sort. So, Alexis Rosenberg, I want to thank you so much for your insight into this case. I really appreciate your time with us today.
Elizabeth, thank you for having me as always.
As of this recording, Kameron Gilchrest is being held behind bars on a $25,000 bond. His next court date is slated for December 8th, and online records show he is being represented by a public defender. That does it for this episode. You can check out more episodes on the Law and Crime YouTube channel, but for now, I'm Elizabeth Millner, and this has been Inside the Crime.